Well, welcome everyone. Thanks a lot for joining. So I'm Evgeny. I created this library we're going to talk about today, AGV, and I'm hugely thankful to everybody who agreed to join. That's a fantastic group of people, which I'm privileged to be one of. It's Mehan Jayasuriya, who's program officer at Mozilla Foundation, and Matteo Collina, who's the technical director at Neoform, and also the creator of Fastify web framework, and Phil Strugeon, who's product manager at Stoplight. Sorry, I'm just like, and Kinley, the chief evangelist at Postman, and Ulysse Carion, who created JSON Type Definition specification. So hi all. My friend Gajus Kuizinas will host this event today. He is partially responsible for AGV's success. He definitely contributed to its popularity in various ways. We'll talk about that. So yeah, he will introduce myself and everybody on the screen today. So guys, over to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for that introduction, Evgeny. Hey everyone, I'm a CTO co-founder of Contra at the moment, where we're building a professional network for the future of work, where talented folks like the panelists today can describe their identity using the projects and collaborations they've done in the past. I'm also an active member of the open source community, I dare to say. Definitely not as known as people on this panel, but I'm still trying. Me personally and the entire Contra team, we do believe in the future of open source, and we support the projects like Slonic and GraphQL Helix, and we also have AGV integrated into everything that we built, which is really crazy. So I'm excited to see that we have quite a few attendees already, and so hello to all of you. Hello to all the speakers again. And I dare to say I've been there around the origins of AGV, but why don't you share it with everyone? What is AGV in a few words, and why did you create it?
Well, AGV name is another JSON schema validator, right? So it's the library that helps you validate JSON payloads or JSON configuration files or anything JSON using JSON schema specification, right? So I started working on that because I was working on some experimenting with some language which used JSON as media, and I couldn't find the JSON validator that worked well. Unfortunately, so I tried quite a few of them, 10 or 11, and I said, all right, I'll just make my own. It should take probably 3-4 weekends. It's probably relatively simple. It wasn't that simple. It took me 3-4 months to make it stable, and then through the 3-4 months to squash all the bugs and make it production ready.
You mentioned that there had been quite a few competing projects, and it has to be because of the complexity that a lot of them did not implement the performance or the compliance with the JSON schema for standard. Can you talk a bit some of the challenges that you faced when developing AGV?
Well, I think JSON schema is on the surface, it's quite simple, right? You just write a JSON file that describes your JSON data, but there are some complexities associated with how you reference parts of your data, because you can reuse parts and you can create recursive data structures such as trees and lists or whatever, so which have recursive definitions, and that's where it all gets complicated, because what AGV does and what made it kind of used widely. It's very fast because it compiles schemas to JavaScript code, right? But compilers are complex, right? I've never built compilers in my life, and AGV was literally the first one. And when you try to compile recursive logic into linear code, there are lots of scope management and recursion management and etc. So it's it was quite complex, and particularly given the technology that I chose to use initially, which was just templates, you would use to render websites. I was using templates to render code. So yeah, that was interesting. So.
Very cool. Yeah, Evgeny always shares with me some implementation details and expecting some smart response, but they always fly over my head. I just nod. It's really cool. One of the biggest challenges for any open source project is the adoption. With the adoption comes community support, comes the donations and everything else. Can you talk about how you made AGV become so popular?
Oh, well, initially it was very slow, right? It was literally one question on GitHub every other week, one download. Well, it was really slow initially, right? So, and I think the real breakthrough happened when some major libraries started to use it, and you actually, that's why I say you're personally to blame, because you added it to your library, which was used by ESLint, and it already created some downloads count, which made people trust it a little bit more. And then ESLint started to use it again thanks to you, and then Webpack started to use it, and then I added it to request library, which is now deprecated, but also was widely used at the time. So anyway, so I think that what was creating the noise around HGV and made people trust it. But I think obviously fundamentally the two core values that HGV had, its performance, as I said, through compilation, it was probably 50% faster than the fastest at the time, and also correctness, right? There was two core values that it was built upon, and I didn't want to compromise on either, which was complex. And the third one, which was like, lots of users were asking for extensibility, and I was against that, because extensibility kind of compromises portability, right? You can't use your schema elsewhere. But users don't seem to care. They seem to just want to have one tool that does lots of other things for them in a single logic. So, I think by making it extensible, also created this like adoption, and now it's like extremely extensible on several dimensions as well.
Cool. So you mentioned a few really exciting projects such as ESLint and Webpack using HGV. What are some other names that are currently using HGV?
I'm going to share the screen to show these HGV users. So these are various like logos of various projects, like including, I think Mozilla Foundation had at least 2 projects I know of that use HGV, and Stoplight, which like Phil is going to talk about later today, is also using it, and Fastify, that was created by Matteo on the call today, it was also started using it. I think it's incredibly big number of very high-profile projects when users. And I think it also helped adoption dramatically, right? Because people start using some tool, which are like, I think I'm much better engineer than I'm a marketer. And then like they start using it, then they see some messages, say, oh, what's HGV? Let's say, and then they submit issues to HGV about some problems with some other tool, but they learn about HGV as well. So I think that's more or less pretty privileged. I'm super privileged to have this list of projects using that.
As I said, it's super impressive, and you're probably one of the most famous people I have in my friends circle. So, what has changed since you got the Mozilla grant? I mean, this is a big deal. Not many projects have gotten it. Really curious to know.
So I think one big change that happened with HGV that I obviously rewritten in TypeScript completely, and I'm going to show several things that changed. So that's TypeScript to write allowed several things, right? So first, the code generation became safe, right? So when you generate code, there is a possibility of various code injection attacks. For example, you have SQL library that like generates SQL request to servers called Slonic, right? So it uses stack template like literal. So I use similar trick, and I think this logic can be used elsewhere for any code generation logic, which takes code snippets inside tag template. Again, it's another implementation to tell it to you, so that I don't think it goes over your head. So anyway, safe code generation was one big thing. Another big thing that changed was standalone validation code. In previous version, it was possible, but it was very limited. But now you can use HGV as a proper compiler to compile your schemas into validation code at build time, and then use this code completely separately. There is even a CLI utility that allows you to compile your schemas into validation logic, or you can do it programmatically. Another big change was this JSON Type Definition support, which Ulysse created also on a call today. So it's an interesting comparison. I think JSON Type Definition, like JSON Schema, is much simpler, is much less verbose. It doesn't allow to implement complex validation scenarios. JSON Schema allows, but it is implemented primarily with the thought of like portability across multiple languages, across multiple platforms, and HGV supports it. And I think the fact that the users have a choice now creates some interesting dynamics. So also another big change that now HGV can be used as pretty recent change that very few users know about. You can use HGV to generate very effective, efficient parsers and serializers. So for example, Fastify uses this trick. We didn't compare the performance yet with how Fastify does it. So for example, if you take serializers that serializes the data structure that you know already, you can have it like 10 times faster than standard JSON serialization, JSON stringify. And equally, parsers, they have similar performance to JSON parse if the data is valid, but if the data is invalid, they would fail as soon as they encounter the first character that makes it invalid. So for example, you expect an object and it's an array, or you expect a string and it's a number, it will fail straight away. It wouldn't continue parsing. So if you have a large JSON payloads, you can reduce DDoS attacks, etc., etc. So that's a big change. Another massive change, which I think I started it as an experiment, but it has grown, and effectively type utilities that allow you to take type of your data and convert it into the type of your schema, which effectively means that you simply, if you're using TypeScript, you can't write invalid schema for your data. That's one big change. And one of the contributors, Eric Brinkman, he contributed this for JSON Type Definition. He also made massive changes for JSON schema type, etc. That's a very big change. Obviously, all the libraries were updated. That was a massive amount of work. And the latest change that literally I released today was restore the support for the first. I mean, it's almost like closing the loop, because HV started from JSON schema version 4. And to implement all this new cool stuff, I had to drop support of draft 4 specification, which made quite a few people unhappy. So today it came back. So draft 4 specification support is back. It's released today, and people can use it with standalone module, standalone npm package, but it's full featured, same API as HV. It's exactly just like same. And that's one of the big changes that allowed to separate general logic from specific language that HV compiles. So effectively, schema specification is a language, and anybody can use it to build another language. So yeah, that's lots of stuff. That's pretty.
That is lots of stuff. Yeah, I guess. Well, thank you to Evgeny and thank you to Mozilla for leading this effort. What are the biggest unsolved problems though? What is the future for HV?
Well, I think HV is Genesis is data validation, and it will remain so. And I'm really looking forward to JSON schema evolving to RFC, to effectively internet standard. I think the support that Postman provides into JSON schema evolution, and Ken is on the call, he will probably talk about it, is going to lead it to it. I hope it will happen in maybe a year or 2 years. So I think supporting that's definitely HV should do. Also, recent release of JSON type definition gives user a choice, and I really think that same as happened with XML, right? People usually introduce additional specification which solve some niche problems, and I think given how HV is architected today, it can be used to implement a compiler for any JSON processing language. I wouldn't even say language. Whatever type of processing you're doing over your JSON data, you can define a declarative language or whatever language and use HV as a compiler from this language. So I think that's more or less the space where it remains. And it has been historically led by its users to a large degree, and it will continue to be led by its users.
Well, I'll personally add it looks like HEV itself is becoming the kind of standard of the data validation, at least in the entire web community. It's been, what, 6 years now that you're working on this, and we're going to, what was the number again of downloads a month?
It's about 200 million now. It's over 200 million already a month. So yeah, it's obviously created by all the libraries that use it, but yeah, it's difficult to say which. But there are also lots of users, and that's really exciting. That it's
it's safe to say that every single user and every single day when they're using the internet today, they're affected by HV in some way or another. Every single website must be using it.
Oh, there was an anecdotal story when I was actually about to get on the plate. I made a release a couple of years ago, and then got on the plate and then landed to a GitHub issue full of questions. What the hell did you do, man? So it was pretty innocuous. So yes, I kind of I try to be very considerate about every single change, how it may affect anybody. I think it's been so far pretty okay in terms of not breaking the internet.
Nice. And as a fellow open source developer, I can sort of say that there is never only one project. One project leads to another as you discover new interesting problems. What are you working on at the moment?
In addition to AGV, so a couple of years ago, we started working on this project. Well, a couple of years ago, we started thinking about this project. And seriousness, we probably started working on it 6 months ago. And that's, I think, similarly, to some extent, similar to how it was with AGV. With AGV, I said, like, there should be no compromise between speed and correctness, right? Performance and correctness are compatible in one library. And when I was looking at all chat solutions, it seemed like unsolved compromise in the market. Like, you either choose very convenient existing chat solutions, or you have to choose very private solutions, which are fundamentally not convenient, right? So we've built a prototype today that allows you to chat in a terminal window through very secure protocol. In terms of protocol comparison, it doesn't have global identity. It has almost impossible man-in-the-middle attack. It doesn't depend on DNSNS. It's federated. It doesn't depend on any centralized component or network-wide attack. So it's effectively more private, obviously not more convenient yet. It's a pretty geeky tool at the moment, but we're planning to release mobile app for that this year, and we already use it for ourselves. So yeah, that's a pretty exciting project we're working on. And one of my sons was very active contributor to this project as well, which is pretty cool.
That is really cool. Evgeny shared details with me about this project many times. They all flew over my head. All I know is just super secure. So that's my key takeaway from that. Evgeny, thank you so much for answering all the questions. Again, huge congratulations with the Mozilla grant. I think the future for AGV is just hard to comprehend. Everyone's going to be using it. That's it. I think we have Matteo next.
Correct. Yes, I just asked him to turn on the video.
Hey, hi, folks.
And I'm going to hide
hello. Matteo, hey. I feel like I know you already, even though we have never spoken. Like, I see you on every GitHub issue I've ever interacted with. You're director of Nearform, which everyone knows about. You were part of the technical steering committee. You're the creator of Fastify and Pino web frameworks. Yep. So many things are going on. Why don't you begin by saying a few words that I might have missed and introduce what is Nearform?
Nearform is a professional services company. So we help our clients develop and design, develop and operate JavaScript applications. So we started with Node.js. We're very vertical on the web platform, but we started with Node.js. We do React, we do even React Native. We lately, last year, we hit the news because we built the COVID contact tracer app for a few countries. Overall, we believe in open source. We believe in contributing back, and most of the time, the vast majority of the open source that I do come from scratching my own inch or Nearform itches, essentially. Like, it's all of these came because I saw problems and I wanted to fix them. Related to things, there is likely a new version of the thing you mentioned. Please, take a moment to update Node.js if you're still using Node 10. This is my Node cap. Also, Node 16 is actually looking pretty amazing. So the new, when that becomes LTS, I would recommend everybody to migrate to that. What else? There is Fastify v4 coming later on, which will include AJV8 likely. So that will be the good time where we do the update. But we'll also have, more importantly, need to ship Pino v7, which is the logging framework, the logging library, one of the logging library for Node, which will have some a little bit of a mad scientist or I don't know, a wild idea on using worker threads for transports for logging, which will ensure better performance and stability compared to the previous approaches. So it's pretty amazing. Apart from that, that's more or less it on my open source activity. I also started a newsletter lately, so if you want to tune in, is nodeland.dev.
Very cool. For those of us who might not be aware, what does Fastify do?
Oh, Fastify is a web framework for Node.js. So you can use this to build your REST APIs, or you can use it for building your, the basics for your GraphQL, or you can use it for building like for rendering your HTML templates. If you like HTML templates, you can also use this to build an HTTP proxy, for example, or all those things essentially. You can use it to do auth. Yeah, everything essentially. So that's kind of it. To some extent, it fits in the same niche of Express, Restify, and Happy and Koa.
I think that's slightly underselling it. It's probably the fastest framework in this category
but
as well.
I'm not. To be honest, I am totally underselling it. I don't want to use it to people to use it and discover it. No, I'm joking. But half of it, essentially, it's it's a good library because of that. It's fast. It comes from good default out of the box. It provides a good experience for your developers and teams to develop things upon without shooting themselves in the foot. It plays well with Node.js, which is a good thing. It does not monkey patches Node. It does not do weird things with Node. It encapsulates what Node does in a good way. So that's essentially how it works internally. So it's you should try it. A lot of people have been trying lately, so I'm being very, very happy about it, to be honest, because more people have been using it more and more. It's I think we have grown from the beginning of last year till now. It's the number of downloads per month have tripled in the course of 1 year and a half. So we are close to 950,000 and per month, and I'm pretty happy about it. So it's going very well, and you should check it. If you're building anything web with Node, you should check it out essentially. One of the important bits is that it ships, and why I'm here on this call, it ships with AJV as the default validator. This was one of the best decisions of the project. I wanted to have data validation in from the very beginning. That was a key decision factor for the framework. And, I'm telling everybody, if you're not validating your data when it comes in, you have a security vulnerability. I don't know if you have other. Let me see. There is. I am probably blurring in the next question, so I'll just go for.
No, all good. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, why is the data important, and you addressed it saying that it's just critical piece of the security.
Yes, there is one more step that Fastify does for you that you still need to do. You still need people. You still need to do. There is there are a few, like JSON.parse is by its own vulnerable to prototype pollution attacks. So you could potentially it does not have prototype pollution itself, but it can create objects that have weird properties in them. And, you can have objects with a constructor property or a prototype property that won't do exactly, when you start interacting with them in JavaScript, they won't work the way you think they would work. So what we do in Fastify before everything, even passing to the validator, we just sanitize all of this. And if there is an attacker, it just blocks it. Note also API does the same. So it's because we just lifted the code that API was using. So, hey, hello. Nice open source thing. So essentially it's validating data is critical. So if you, as I said, if you don't validate the data, you have a security vulnerability. So and a lot of the vast majority of people don't. Like I'm stunned because in the vast majority of the Node.js tutorial out there, they don't show how to validate the data that comes in that request. Like if you consider all those many people that are using Express today, like I don't know how many times it was downloaded today, this week or the last 7 days, but it's downloaded 16 million times. And the vast majority of those people are not validating the data as it comes in. I'm stunned. Okay, I'm just, it's such a big of a problem. And so for Koa, which has this, they just don't do it. I am, how it's even. I build software. I work for a company that builds software professionally, so it's validations are a fundamental part for.
Is it safe to say that anything you build, if we test it today, is going to have a validation for all the inputs?
Likely so. If it's not, we have a bug. But what I'm saying is all the things that I see have a validation for that input. But it's everybody puts bugs in essentially.
I think it's like the data validation and security in general is like such a broad topic of so many things to decide on. And what made you decide on like using JSON schema as the basis for validation?
So at that time, I was starting to when I was designing Fastify at the very beginning, I was looking at the various options. The library I liked the most, to be honest, was Joy. Joy is another data validation for Node. It had a phenomenal Fluent API. I love that Fluent API. And it's actually pretty neat. So you could actually compose it just by concatenating stuff. It was super easy to use. Developers loved it. Pretty good. But it had 3 problems. First of all, it was not easy to introspect. So if you wanted to interact it with, for example, OpenAPI or Swagger, it was problematic. So the interaction between that and OpenAPI and Swagger was very problematic. It also was very problematic to, for example, do any meta programming on top of it, essentially. So I was researching the problem, and I found JSON schema. By the way, I don't like JSON schema. Okay, it's just one of the things that is the most popular thing that we've got. Also, this decouple the validation step from the writing step. So I can just use some libraries that can produce me JSON schema and then feed JSON schema to the validator that I wanted. Now, Fastify was born in more than 4 years ago now. So like at that time, AJV was definitely at the very early days. It was not early days, but it was a lot more competition to some extent. Okay. In that front. So I was not sure which one would win. So picking JSON schema would make, okay, well, I can just pick this language now, this spec, and I'm done. On top of that, I invented that technique that to create that serializer function that speeds up the rendering of JSON that Evgeny, I sorry if I pronounced your name well, lately added to AJV. So there is this library called Fast JSON Stringify that takes a JSON schema as an input, and then it creates this very, very fast rendering function for that JSON. And it's a messy code to maintain. So if Evgeny you can add that to AJV, I can just get rid of that thing. That would be also.
Please don't get rid of it. I'm actually using it as well in quite a few projects.
Yeah, no, I mean, if there is something else that is easier to maintain, because maintaining that library is really painful, if I recommend somebody to check it out. That library is actually quite fast. So that technique is extremely powerful, and I have been using it everywhere since forever. And it's used also in a lot of modules that are not Fastify related to some extent. So it's you can use it for whatever you want, to be honest. So just to clarify, that library is downloaded close to 500,000 per week, essentially. So
sounds good.
It's pretty popular. So I wrote that. I really wanted to have that feature. So also that's why JSON Schema.
Sounds good. All right. Well, you know, since you chose AGV and JSON Schema, what are the improvements that you would want from AGV?
I don't know, really. Like, it has been working phenomenally for me. So it's to be honest, it's keep going as you are. I would just ask for slightly better support for JavaScript and ESM and all those bits, like having that dot default that TypeScript produce on my JavaScript I don't like it, but that's a very, very minor annoyance overall. So I'm basically complaining about nothing.
All right, sounds good. And you mentioned at the beginning the open source projects and how Nearform supports them. Can you say in a few words how Nearform supports open source projects?
Nearform sponsored me to work on Fastify, Pino, Node.js, all those things. So a significant chunk of my time is spent on these open source technologies that we use throughout all our projects at Nearform. So on top of that, there is other colleagues of mine that contribute to Node Core mostly. So yeah, that's it. So we spend a significant amount of money on keeping up the lights of the ecosystem.
Very cool. Well, Matteo, thank you for all the open source contributions and thank you for answering all my questions. It's been a pleasure talking.
Thank you, Gajus. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. Well, that was exciting. Next, we have Mehan. Well, Mehan, hello. You're a program officer at Mozilla Foundation. You lead Mozilla open source support program, as well as other open source initiatives and support community networking ecosystem in general. Exciting. Can you tell us in a few words, what is the MOS program?
Yeah, so the MOS program was basically set up to support open source projects with grants. So generally we look for projects that are important to the open source ecosystem, projects where there's a clear community that has been built around them, and projects where the maintainers of the project have an idea for some kind of ambitious thing they want to do with the project that they need some resources to support. And so there's, there's not a ton of funding out there for open source projects, but a lot of it is, centered on building new feature sets and building new projects. We like to fund this stuff like paying down technical debt, plugging security vulnerabilities, and kind of major rewrites, which is exactly what Evgeny did with HAV here.
Nice. What is sort of the minimal criteria for a project to be funded by you guys?
Yeah, so we do look for projects that have successfully built a community around them. So that means both external contributors as well as users. And that doesn't mean you necessarily need to have 200 million downloads a month like HAV does, but you do need to be able to tell a story about the growth of the project and show that there are people who are invested in it, both in terms of using the project as well as contributing to it. And that could be a relatively small community, but it needs to be a healthy community, and you need to be able to tell a story about how that community has kind of grown and scaled over time alongside the project.
Nice. And using that example, what were the attributes of HAV that attracted you?
Yeah, so I think HAV, I mean, it's kind of the perfect project for us in a sense, right? Because what we always say is we want to go out and find projects that are important to the open source ecosystem and that could use some support to tackle a big project that will help them become more sustainable. So I think at the time that we received an application from Evgeny, he probably had about 100 million downloads a month. So he's basically doubled that in the time that he's been working with us, which is fantastic. But it was a huge amount of people who were using the project. And then we looked at who was maintaining it and who the core team is. And so much of the work was just done by Evgeny himself in his own free time. And this is work that he was doing completely voluntary and completely unpaid. And so he basically had this idea to make a bunch of ambitious improvements to the code base, the TypeScript rewrite being the kind of biggest piece of that, that would make the project easier to maintain in the long term, and that would make it more fun for him also to work on the project and more challenging for him to work on the project. And so that was exciting to us. I think we also suggested to Evgeny that he think a little bit about developing the community and more pathways for folks to contribute. And more documentation to help folks contribute. And so those two things together were kind of the ideal package for us. You know, we like to talk about open source projects almost like a campsite. Like we want folks to come into the program, get some resources, get some funding, and then leave in a better position than they were when they started, and to leave in a way that makes it more likely that the project will be kind of sustained in the long run, and that it'll continue to be useful and continue to be a resource for the open source community. So we're absolutely thrilled to have supported HAV, and HAV version 8 is, you know, everything that was kind of promised to us and more. So we're thrilled to have been able to support this work.
Very cool. Is Mozilla, to your knowledge, using HAV anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, we have different kind of funding tracks that we fund projects through at Moss, and the track that we funded this project through is what we call our foundational technology track. And so that's meant to fund dependencies that we have, technologies that we use. And so one of the kind of wrinkles for an application in that track is you need to submit an application, but you also need somebody inside of Mozilla to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, I use this on my team. It's important to Mozilla product. This is why I think this is like the best thing of its breed and why we should support it. And so, you know, in this case, Mozilla is absolutely supporting HAV as like a company that depends on HAV, an organization that uses HAV. I believe it's used in MDN. It may be used somewhere in Firefox. I think there's a lot of Mozilla products that are probably using it.
Wow, this is exciting. When do you expect to share the future plans for the Moss Fund?
Yeah, so the Moss Fund is kind of on hiatus at the moment. There's been some restructuring at Mozilla in the last year or so, and we have put a few of our programs on pause. We're kind of in the process right now of doing a evaluation of the program and looking at all 5 years of the program and seeing where has our funding had the greatest impact and what kinds of projects are the most successful. I think, you know, it's likely in the future that we will continue to fund technical projects, whether through Moss or through other award-making tracks that are focused on technical projects. So I'd encourage folks to check out the Mozilla Foundation website, which is foundation.mozilla.org. That's where we list all of our different award programs and all of our different fellowship programs. And we're hoping to kind of spin up even more technically focused programs in the future. So some of those might be good opportunities for folks who are watching this call.
Very cool. Is there an email they should be hitting up you to, you know, like share their project?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not funding stuff through Moss at the moment, but folks can always shoot an email to moss@mozilla.org, and that'll come to me, and I'm always happy to chat about stuff. Or, you know, if folks just want advice about what are different programs at Mozilla they should be looking out for, I'm always happy to talk to folks about that stuff.
Man, thank you very much. I might be hitting you know, your email inbox myself. So
for sure,
right,
yeah. Feel free to hit my line. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Phil. You're next.
Hello there.
Me?
How you doing?
Hello
I can
there.
totally hear you. What's up?
All right, man. Well, it's exciting to have you on the call. You know, product manager at Stoplight. It's a well-known tool in developer community for designing and documenting APIs. Do you want to tell a few words more about Spotlight?
Yeah, Stoplight is a company. A lot of people make that mistake. So the origin of the name Stoplight is we used to do a lot of testing tools, scenarios. We'd help you kind of write test workflows for your APIs. We do a bunch of other stuff. Right now, it's about kind of the API design lifecycle. So from kind of planning an API and modeling the whole thing through to kind of mocking it so that clients can talk to a fake implementation and give you feedback based on that. Yeah, we've just released some more documentation tooling and a spectral, which is a kind of, basically it's an open API validator, but you can write your own style guides to do anything. And so people use it for API governance, essentially, where you can just write like, don't use kebab case, you should use whatever camel case and all sorts of random things like that. So, and yeah, a lot of that stuff is using HAV. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, I was going to just ask, like, you know, how exactly do you integrate the HAV? Like, because do people provide a JSON schema that you then compile for them and use the HAV? Like, what's sort of the flow there? Yeah,
so people using Stoplight products, you know, we help them write open API and or JSON schema. And so they are creating their own open API and their own JSON schema. And then we kind of use that for all sorts of helpful things. So where HAV comes in really is for our for Spectral, the API kind of style guide tool, we use the official OpenAPI JSON schema. It gets a little bit meta here, so hold on. So OpenAPI has a JSON schema which defines what is valid OpenAPI, right? And so if you do something invalid that's not real OpenAPI, it'll be like, hey, you can't do that. That's not valid. But people can also write their own JSON schemas that will validate other JSON schemas. It's pretty bonkers. So you can write these custom rules in Spectral using our custom DSL, which is like, this function, this should be truthy, or that should exist, or that should be an enum. But when that DSL isn't enough for you, you can use JSON schema to validate other JSON schema documents. So it's basically ESLint, but instead of writing JavaScript, you write JSON schema,
Very cool. And you're definitely not new to JSON schema ecosystem. You're one of the few people who has been attributed for various contributions by the JSON schema group. Can you talk more about it, your involvement with the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as someone previously mentioned, kind of it's less about loving JSON schema and more about trying to find the thing that's the best and most popular and make it better, right? So I was looking for something that would work everywhere for everything. I wanted something I could use for contract testing and for documentation and for SDK generation and just everything, right? Because there's and server-side validation. I wanted something that could do all of it. And there was like API Blueprint, and there was RAML, and there was OpenAPI, and there was JSON Schema, and they were subtly different. Oh, that was annoying. Like they're 90% the same thing, but there's like little bits that just get you. So my main contribution at first was trying to fix some of those differences. And so I've been working with the OpenAPI people and the JSON Schema people, and there was lots of other people kind of helping this process as well, but we were basically trying to iron out those differences. And so one of them was like, OpenAPI has deprecated true, JSON Schema doesn't. So I just sent a little pull request to the spec. I was like, deprecated true, hey, I'm a contributor. But beyond that, kind of a lot more reviewing of wording. I think specifications can be incredibly hard for the average person to understand. So my goal was not to try and be the smartest person in the room, but to try and be the lay person in the room, who could just be like, I don't know what that means. That doesn't make any sense to me. Can you try again? Like, I don't know better than you. I can't correct your wording, but I can say, what? And then you can fix it until I stop saying what. So I did a lot of that, which I honestly think made JSON Schema draft. I think I came along after draft 7, or maybe just as 7 was getting tagged. And then 2019, 09, I think we helped make that a lot more simple to understand for the average human, because, you know, documentation and specifications are different things. But even then, like as a tooling vendor myself, looking at the specification, I didn't really know what was going on. So it was nice to help make that easier.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for your contributions. I can definitely appreciate a more simple spec, being not the smartest person in the room. Cool. So, you know, you talked a bit about how you're using a HTTP at Stoplight and all the inception things you're doing, like validating schema, diff schema, and so forth. What are the things you wish HTTP did that it's currently not doing? You know, like how Evgeny should be using that MOS funding, in other words.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's another usage I forgot to mention. So as well as our kind of validation tool, which is a bit meta and probably not the best example, our mocking tool, I think, uses it quite nicely, because basically with the mock, because it will say, here is your OpenAPI file, let's run a mock server for that. We know what the validation rules should be for that. So we can actually respond with validation errors if you do it wrong. And that Prism tool, the open source tool that uses it, it also has a proxy mode. So you can kind of run a proxy server in front of your actual APIs or your development APIs, whatever. And it will tell you if you made mistakes either on the request or if the server made a mistake on the response. So you can get all sorts of useful errors. We've had problems where, you know, people are trying to integrate with an API and they're sending excess parameters, like some random parameter that they thought did something or might have done something in some conversation a while ago, but was since removed. And this will just like shout at you if you make that mistake. So we use AJV for that as well. And I think Prism, especially the proxy, is the most useful implementation of AJV. But as for what it could do better, it's really unfortunate that draft 4 support was removed in the latest major. I'm sure there's really good technical reasons for that, but for a company who's trying to support OpenAPI 2, 3, and 3.1, because they're based on draft 4 for both version 2 and version 3 kind of, and OpenAPI 3.1 is based on draft 2020-02, it means you always need both. And so I've seen a lot of OpenAPI tooling vendors trying to decide whether they want to try and mush in 2 different major versions of AJV, which is not lovely. You have to use aliases and it gets really weird because there's major differences between the code. So they either try and do that, or if they're doing something that's done, like if you're using the OpenAPI JSON Schema definition, that's written in draft 4. You can convert that to a more modern draft, and then you can validate against that. But that's a bit of a dirty hack. So I think for the OpenAPI community, if there was any way that kind of draft 4 could be brought back, that would make it really easy for everyone to use one tool and have like one response for all of the current popular drafts that are in use, you know.
So I don't know if you missed this at the beginning of the call, but Evgeny actually released draft 4 support today back to HTTP. So, you know,
thank you very much. That's great.
So, you know, it's being done in real time, the support for all the editions. If you mention something else, you might get it done in the next 5 minutes or so. But yeah, I totally agree with, you know, the sentiment there, especially about some of the use cases for HTTP you mentioned earlier. I think, you know, especially before GraphQL, like more the RESTful APIs, like not having that validation of unknown parameters can be really frustrating because, you know, people think it's going to do something as a result of adding that parameter, but it actually is just like null, void, and disappears.
We had a really bad one like 2 or 3 companies ago. It was like some carpooling app, and the CTO just said, hey, can we get a list of everybody who signed up with this particular flag set to true? And we were like, what flag is that? We have no idea. He's like, oh no, but just like the last year's worth of data of users that signed up with that. Like, we have not been recording that flag. And that was apparently some huge deal. And like no one knew about it because I think it was there in some beta version and then it was removed and no one told the mobile clients. But if Prism Proxy was in place in our E2E environment or in development environment, it would have blown up and be like, the fuck is that? And then everyone would have known that it was a problem. So yeah, that stuff's really helpful.
Very cool. So you guys are clearly benefiting from the open source community. How does the Stoplight contribute back to the open source community?
Yeah, we released a blog post a little while ago called like how Stoplight contributes back to the open source community or something along those lines. And basically there's 3 main ways, right? There's by giving time, giving money, and giving thanks. So we give time. When I got to Stoplight, we had a lot of forks of a lot of projects, and basically we would quite often notice there was a problem with something and then fix it and then kind of put our logo on it. And that was, then we have to maintain these forks of these things. And the theory was like, we are raising the profile of those projects by putting them on our project as well. That was kind of what was thought, but I think it's far more useful to contribute the fixes back upstream, and then you don't have to maintain forks anymore. And if you do a really big important job, maybe they could put thanks on the README to the company so that it's time well spent. But yeah, so when I got there, we spent a lot of time kind of getting rid of our forks. We got rid of like 20, 30 forks of open source projects and submitted a bunch of bugs back that they didn't have. So that was nice. It was a bit of work, but it was helpful. And then, yeah, donating money. I think AJV was one of the first projects we started giving money to every month. The basic argument there is you can either think of this as like a virtuous argument of just like, we use this thing, it would be nice if we paid them. It's the good thing to do. But if that argument isn't working with your kind of higher ups and your bosses and your financial people, the argument would be, how much money would it cost us if this person got burnt out and decided to give up on the project and we had to re-implement it all ourselves? So at that point, paying $250 a month to somebody seems like an absolute bargain, when you'd have to think about like, oh, we have to rewrite this from scratch or maintain a fork ourselves. So pick whichever argument you want, support people so they don't get burnt out, which is nice, or avoid future work. And then, yeah, giving thanks, we just make sure on our READMEs, we list all of the packages that really helped us out. So, you know, money is good a lot of the time, and money and thanks sometimes. But sometimes if it's a smaller package, maybe we just say like, and thanks for doing what you're doing. And that helps like more people use the package who then might also pay as well. So yeah, those are the three approaches.
I think, you know, like something you mentioned too, I can definitely relate to the fact that, you know, a lot of people, when they think about contributing to open source, they kind of like strictly think, oh, I have to like make a fork, you know, like write a patch and, you know, like raise a pull request for this. When the reality is that when you're like open source maintainer, like even the tiniest things, such as even like describing the issues that you're having with the product and like saying thanks for the releases, they're the kind of things that like really makes you appreciate. You really appreciate the knowledge that someone is actually benefiting from your project. And I think like one of the other interesting things that you raised is you know like that basically that math behind like determining like how do you decide like how much to allocate to open source funding. And we think a lot about this actually at in Contra, like when we're evaluating open source projects at the moment, especially if they're lesser known, we're literally thinking, all right, like how much would it cost to hire this person? If we cannot hire, like how much would it cost for us still like to give them the amount of money to make sure that this project is maintained to the quality standard that we want all of the software within Contra to be. And this is sort of the path we're following. Have you had any, like, is there like a math, is there like a formula, how you decide like how much to allocate funding to different projects?
Yeah, I actually made a little spreadsheet, which was basically, I did a survey for all of the different teams and all the different projects, right? So the our mock server and our documentation tool and our like internal API and the Spectral, the style guide, like I surveyed all the teams and basically said, which are the most important packages? Which packages would you hate if they vanished or stopped being maintained? Like what would mess your day up? Give me a number between 1 and 5 for each of those tools, right? Like if you don't care about it at all, it's a 0. If you care a bit, but you could probably rewrite it in a weekend if you had to, and if you had the motivation to, that might be a 1. If that tool vanishing would like drastically delay the delivery of business goals by like more than 2 weeks, then that's probably a 5, right? And so we would kind of tot up those points, and then I can't remember what the math was to give it a financial number, but it was basically, we used a little bit of math like that. And so the spreadsheet would give us a number, and then I go, that seems a little bit low. I know them, or that's a lot of money for that. And I used it basically as a guide, and then kind of when the algorithm suggests, Phil suggests, and then I gave that to the people with the credit cards, and they just set it up.
Nice. Well, I have to ask now, like, what's the number assigned to the HEV from 1 to 5?
Ooh, that's a good question. So it suggested $10 for some reason. I think my algorithm was a bit off, and I think we gave the suggestion was then $50, but I feel like we ended up giving a lot more than that. I'll have to have a look.
Sounds like the algorithm needs some improvements.
Yeah, well, I set this thing up a while ago, and since then we've been doing it a bit more ad hoc. But yeah, cool. that doesn't seem correct.
I'm sure we can fix that. What are the future plans for the Stoplight?
So we are currently doing a closed beta of Elements, which is open API documentation. So there's a lot of documentation tools out there. This is nothing brand new in a way, but a lot of the tools are either easy to embed into other places, or they look good, or they have lots of functionality, but there's not many that do all of them. So we're trying to kind of fix that problem. So that kind of rounds it out. We've got an open source documentation tool, open source mock server, open source style guide checker, and a free open API designer. So you can just use the whole thing for free if you want. And then there's like cool paid optional extras. But after that, I think we're going to go tackle the world of API governance, because everyone talks about API governance and no one's really made any tools that actually do that yet. So everyone who is trying to handle governance just like glues together random CLI scripts in Excel spreadsheets and pretends it's hard.
Very cool. Well, Phil, thank you very much. Sorry for ambushing you for a fundraiser, but
no worries.
really enjoyed talking with you, and you know, looking forward to see the future of the Stoplight. Thanks, man. All right. Well, next we have Kin Lane. Kin, I'm really excited to talk with you. You know, I think every single person on this video has used Postman, so you know that's a safe bet. You know, you're studying the tech, business, and politics of APIs since 2010, and you're a presidential innovation fellow during the Obama administration, which is really exciting because you're probably at the closest proximity I've ever been to anyone who has interacted in any way to Obama or his peers around him. So I'm going to have a question at the end around that. But you know, just for anyone watching, what does Postman do? And if I missed any important details when introducing you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. No, I think you got most of it. I would add, I'm the co-chair of the Open API Initiative Business Governance Group. So I don't work on the spec, but I work on all the business and everything around the spec. And so what does Postman do? Well, Postman started as a simple HTTP API client. So it's how you kick the tires to see what an API does, play with it, understand how it works, or more importantly, doesn't work. Over the years, it evolved as a API testing suite. So you can build collections and build tests, and then you can run those in Postman, or you can run them with our open source runner, which is called Newman. And but then in the last 3 to 4 years, you know, we've evolved to become a full lifecycle API management tool. So you can design your APIs, you can document your APIs, you can mock your APIs, and pretty much touch on almost every stop along the API lifecycle. But the beauty of being an API client is if we don't do it, like security is one thing we don't do a lot of, you can use other people's APIs to do that and get that done. So.
This is really cool. Man, I don't remember what year did you release? Because I remember using your software so many years ago that I cannot even like put a number to it.
Yeah, it was 2013, I believe, as a Chrome extension, and then it became a desktop app, I think, by 2014, and then we've migrated back where we're desktop and web now today.
Very cool. That's super neat. What are other open source projects you're working on?
Well, you know, our kind of flagship's always been Newman, is the, you know, Postman collection plus to define your APIs in your tests. And then running that with Newman, which is open source command line runner, is really been the powerhouse for you know, most of our 15 million developers. And so Newman is kind of been the core open source offering, but early this year we started Postman Open Technologies to kind of further invest in the open source community. I'm the director of it. And that began with joining the Open API initiative. So really open source projects being specification focused at first, joining the OAI, you know, increasing our investment in the Open API community. And then we replicated similar with Async API, which is a sister specification to Open API. That is for message and event-driven APIs, and then similar for the JSON Schema community. So we've actually hired Fran and Lukasz, who are the Async API team. I've hired Ben from the JSON Schema community to my open team, and I'm continuing to build, kind of add to my team like that. Also, really working hard to find money either within Postman or outside to fund projects. For example, the Open API, because I'm on the business governance board, we're funding JSON Schema's documentation rewrite right now. And so we're doing a lot of matchmaking like that, finding money, defining projects, finding money, and really trying to make things happen in the API specification realm. But then beyond that, you know, continuing to invest in Newman. I just found out that I'm the owner of HTTP bin as an open source project now. So I'll be taking that over. And then we've got quite a few other projects that we're looking at investing in and spending time making sure that they're a little more stable than they are right now. So.
Very cool. You mean http-bin.org? Is that the project you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm now the steward of that fine project. So we're retooling. We're going through all of the issues and trying to build the roadmap right now. So if anybody has any feedback, feel free to ping me.
Very cool. And just because you touched on it, and we discussed this with Phil, and you talked about the maths of like sort of like finding the pairing and finding the funding and pairing it with open source projects. Again, the same question, like, do you have some like math or logic, or what is it based on? Like, how do you guys arrive at, like, this is how much we should be allocating to this project?
I'm not nearly as advanced as Phil is in this area. It's still gut right now. Just things that we
Phil's
depend
doesn't
on.
work, so
Hey, but he's at least got some planning and structure around it.
Yeah. Tried at least.
Oh, so no, I mean, I'm pulling together a strategy right now, based upon what we're investing in our own open source, what we're investing in some of the specs. I'm going through and profiling various tools, AJV being one of them. I'm really kind of coming up with an algorithm for how do you quantify the scope of a community, and then identifying the moving parts that make that community healthy. And then I'm going to attach some dollar figures to that once I get to that point. So mine is really right now like HTTP bin, Newman, async, OpenAPI, JSON schema. All of these is like, what's the size of the community? What makes them successful? What makes them stable and healthy? And then attach dollar figures to those things, and then try to go find money for those needs.
I love it. Like listening to both of you gives me so many ideas of how to try to solve this problem. We should definitely catch up afterwards and talk deeper about how to quantify this. How do you guys use AJV? You mentioned, very high level, but I'm curious more low level.
Yeah, I mean, low level directly, we use AJV to validate OpenAPI specifications, like Phil said. You can design using Swagger, OpenAPI, and Postman as well. And we validate in real time using AJV to make that happen. For our own APIs, when you make calls and to the Postman APIs, because every good API platform should have their own APIs. If not, you're probably not in it for the long haul. And our APIs, when you make calls to them, they're validated in and out, using AJV to make sure that everything is as it should be. Excuse me. So those are the core direct, but really the widest usage of AJV on our platform is that you can validate your own APIs using Postman and Newman using AJV. So we have, how Postman collections work is you can define an API that you're making a call to, and as part of that request, pre-request, or that post request, you can write little JavaScript, and you can use AJV in both those points. So you can define a single API call and use AJV to validate the body of that request. You can validate the response using AJV as it comes back. And then if you're daisy chaining or connecting multiple calls together, you can do that all the way throughout that and validate that workflow or scenario using AJV. So really, it's a fundamental part of the Postman sandbox, as we call it, for those pre and post request scripts. And with millions of collections running, 15 million developers, that adds up pretty fast when you start thinking about what's being validated with AJV across the world right now. So
yeah, that's sick. I wonder if you guys also, I've personally actually never done that, and kind of like reflecting on some of the thoughts that we're discussing here. Have you ever evaluated the risk of the project disappearing, as Phil mentioned before?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely that's a huge concern for us, especially as we grow. I mean, I would say the biggest reason why we're investing in open source and open specifications is we not only need these projects to exist, we need a certain amount of velocity moving forward, and we need synergy and velocity across especially the specs. I mean, this is my number one priority right now is Open API and Async API both use JSON schema to describe the request and response payload, but also the message payload when it's a pub sub or event or message driven. And so that defining and modeling using JSON schema, even though it's not the core purpose of JSON schema, is super critical. But then that validation piece is just a fundamental ingredient. So the stability of the specs, the velocity of the specs, as well as the stability and velocity of the community and the tooling like AJV is super important to us. And if we're on a rocket ship right now, we're that classic startup right now with lots of money, growing massively, and we need all the projects that we depend on to be moving forward at a similar velocity. So
very interesting. Like me, the Contra, we're in a similar boat. Again, like super high velocity, moving really fast, lots of people joining, lots of user acquisition, lots of money as well. And we're looking around as for the components that we depend on and exploring new things that should we bring on. And the biggest risk when I evaluate software is like, well, how many contributors does this have? And like, what is the chance, given the scope of this can, as you say, lose the velocity? We're taking slightly more aggressive path where we're actively evaluating acquisitions of open source projects almost as if they're companies. And there's like there are two arguments here to make. One is that ownership of the project and the ability to ensure that it has that velocity that you want. Two is obviously a talent acquisition, if you can do that together with the project by promising them the ability to work on this project. And free is just like a phenomenally cost-effective way to advertise and attract other talent to the company by setting this example. So we're yet to make the first acquisition, but I have my eyes on one of the projects I'm really excited about, and I think it's going to have a massive impact on the entire industry if we executed it
nice.
Successfully.
Very smart.
Yeah, very cool. What should be improved about AJV?
I mean, from my vantage point, I'm an evangelist, so I'm really interested in the storytelling in the community and how things are being used. And so I'm not, the tool itself is, I would say, at a very stable state. It's ubiquitous, it's stable. So many folks depend on it. What I want to see more investment in is like this event, more of this, more storytelling, more bringing people out of the woodwork that are using it. Because I mean, you look at the little logo, splash of logos on the AJV site, that does not do it justice. I mean, I personally know some pretty massive enterprise organizations that AJV is ubiquitous across. And so I would like to see those folks come out of the woodwork, tell their story, become members, fund it. I think this is an important part of that velocity. I think open source projects, it's part of like what Phil was saying about, giving thanks, and is come out of the woodworks, tell how you're using it, write a story on your blog post, add a section to your documentation that talks about AJV usage, and then send your product manager, send your folks to conversations like this. And so really those are the changes that I want to see, because then that gets more voices to the table, that gets more needs and requirements to the table. And I think the tool, which is already in a very, stable state, I think only gets stronger in that kind of environment. So that's where I really want to see the investment and kind of for the roadmap is more on the marketing business side, but that's my jam too. So.
Very cool. Again, we should talk after. Maybe a Contra and Postman can start Woodworks Foundation. So
yeah, I'm down.
And anything you want to mention about the future plans of Postman?
I mean, so we launched WebSockets support this morning. So we're now in a WebSockets client. And so that really pushed us out of the HTTP 1.1 realm into, TCP protocols, but also other patterns other than request and response. So pub sub, message, and event driven. And so we're really, that's building on that foundation, going into gRPC, Kafka, these other realms, which, kind of reflects our investment in Open API and Async API, but also making schemas a kind of first-class citizen, which validation, modeling and validation, is part of. So really helping enterprise organizations get their act together when it comes to their schema house, and how schema are used across request response as well as event and message driven APIs, so that you're a little more coherent and organized about how you describe things, how they move in and out of your organization, how they move in and out with partners, and everything is validated and as well defined and versioned and iterated upon as possible. So that's, I would say there's some other areas that we're going to be investing in, but from an open technologies, that's the big one, because for me, the future, REST request response APIs aren't going anywhere. They're definitely the core foundation of the kind of API realm, but a diverse API toolbox is the future. Getting us ready for HTTP3 and just, GraphQL, multiple patterns is, it's not just, hey, everything should be just REST or everything should just be GraphQL. It's a diverse toolbox is the future, and we're looking to support that. So.
Very cool. It's super cool to hear about the business plans, innovation there, and so forth. I'm sure you guys are probably looking at the Web3 and crypto space too. So many exciting things, developments there. Oh, yeah. Just to end on a riskier note. So the question is, have you met Obama, and can we get him involved in our Woodworks organization?
I did not meet him. I was round 2 of Presidential Innovation Fellows, and they promised, round 1 got to meet him and hang out with him and sit around the table and talk to him, and they kept promising us every week that it would be. And even we like rally and come from our offices. Oh, he's coming. No, didn't happen. And then one time I went for lunch with my buddy and to a sandwich shop on Pennsylvania Avenue, and someone called me and said, hey, come over, grab coffee with us. I just want to talk. And I left, and Obama came there and sat down with my buddy and they had sandwiches and with Biden and him. And so, no, I never got to meet him. I got to hang out in the West Wing a lot, but no, I never got to meet him, unfortunately. So. Very cool. Well, thank you very much for this interview. Thank you for answering all the questions. Looking forward to catching up afterwards. All right. Thanks. Thank you. Ulysse, Carion. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, man. Sorry, I did not have time to clarify before the call.
Yeah, how you doing? I'm doing good.
All right. Cool, man. So you're the creator of JSON Type Definition Specification, RFC 8927. Not many of us can say something along those lines. What is it?
Yeah. So presumably everyone here is familiar with JSON schema. In a sense, JSON type definition is like a simplified subset of JSON schema. It's a specification that has implementations in like 6 or 7 or so programming languages. It's formalized as IETF RFC 8927, like you mentioned. And the core idea of it is I took something like JSON schema and got rid of all the features that don't make sense if you're thinking about code generation. So the explicit goal of JSON type definition is if most mainstream programming languages can't express it, it's not part of the spec. And conversely, there's almost nothing there's almost no way you can write a JSON type definition schema that doesn't like basically directly map onto the type systems of most programming languages. So that's
love it. Yeah. I love it. I was looking at the examples on the website and I immediately picked it up and I was like, this is exactly what we need. So cool. What do you currently do?
With JSON type definition, maintenance mode, basically. And there isn't really much work to be done there, frankly.
Other open source projects? Or is
other open source projects? Not really, nothing like super interesting. I am probably going to make an implementation of the Unicode text segmentation standard UAX29 for Go because I need that. But like, no, not really. Nothing open source. I have private stuff, but not
Gotcha.
free.
So how does this fit with AJV?
So AJV as a version of Jenny's going to tell me I'm wrong, but I think it's as a version 7 has support for JSON type definition. And I think as you mentioned at the top, it's basically an alternative thing you can turn on instead of like the JSON object you pass in being a JSON schema, you pass in a JSON type definition. And
Very cool.
Yeah. I think also, I don't know if the JSON schema backend can do this, but the JSON type definition backend for AJV, you can pass it a schema and it'll output to you optimized functions for stringify and parse, which is pretty cool.
That is cool.
In a lot of ways, that brings JavaScript in line with a lot of like other programming languages like Java, C#, Go, where the standard library or a de facto standard library will be able to like at compile time use reflection to generate specialized functions that can walk through your types and then like a byte buffer of JSON and rapidly do the serialization, deserialization, which for a company I work at, Segment, where we process like millions of JSON messages per second. A non-trivial part of our AWS bill is compute spent on cycles doing JSON serialization, deserialization. So this is actually like a pretty immense feature.
I find it so interesting. So I don't know how much I can reveal, but basically, you know, one of the co-founders of Segment is the author of the project that I'm desperately trying to acquire at this point. So it's going to be interesting to see how that conversation develops.
Huh.
We are heavily dependent on that project. He seems to be the only maintainer. So like that's the equation I was describing there earlier, where it's going to be really interesting to see like how that conversation goes forward. Very cool, man. Do you know how broadly JSON type definition is adopted at the moment? Like,
no. I think much like AJV doesn't know who's using it. That's sort of by design. In a certain sense, you know, I'm sure like Douglas Crockford doesn't know where JSON is used. Like in a certain sense, this is the open source life. You die in poverty like an artist, and no one really thanks you or anything, and that's fine. I don't want to be thanked, or like I don't really want to know who's using JSON type definition in a sense. I do know there's like quite a few companies. I think Evgeny mentioned that you guys are using it now. Yeah, but mostly speaking, no one has to talk to me to use it, so I don't really know.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting problem, like knowing like who's using your software. So just before I like joined Contra and like started working on this problem, I was actually working on Gitspo, which was a problem of giving more visibility to open source projects in terms of what are the companies that are using it. Ironically, could not raise funding for that startup, so that's why I started at Contra. But you know, that's sort of one day we're going to start a foundation with you know, Postman and others. Cool. And any future plans, or actually before that, I asked everyone this question. I want to ask you too. Like, are there any things that HTTP should improve?
I mean, I'm gonna like give away, like, obviously I wrote an RFC and RFCs are permanently immutable. So I'm gonna have a strong bias in this direction, but you know, no new major versions would be good, you know, like JSON is still rocking V1 since like what, 1996. That sort of stuff is always nice. But obviously like innovation sometimes requires breaking things. So whatever.
Well, I think, you know, like what you mentioned basically requires a lot of focus and isolation of scope as well. And MOS is basically going to definitely help with at least one of those things for Evgeny's projects and many other projects.
I think in a lot of ways I'm reminded of I think Pascal once wrote a letter to a friend, and his like first sentence was, "I'm sorry, this letter is too long. I didn't have enough time to make it short." I think there's a similar thing in software where I didn't have enough time to make this a not backwards incompatible change. So we're breaking.
Cool. Hey, well, again, it was super cool talking with you. Thank you so much for answering all these questions. Yeah, I guess I'll invite everyone back, and Evgeny, I'll hand it over back to Evgeny. Just again, thanks everyone for having me here, ask you these questions. It was super interesting to interact with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's been really interesting conversations. I learned so much. I don't even know what to say. Thanks a lot. And Mehan and Phil and Ulysse and Kane and Gajus, huge thanks to you. So we'll share the video. So that's been super cool. It's a privilege to have you here.